All right, today is January 20th, year 2003. We're sitting talking to Mr. Shelley Berman in his home in Los Angeles. How you doing, Shelley?
I'm doing fine, thank you very much.
Good, good. This is for the National Comedy Hall of Fame, and we're just going to start from the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and in the Michael Reese Hospital, I think, from what I understand, and a long, long time ago. I'm not going to tell you the year.
Well, what did your dad do for a living?
Well, my dad did a lot of things. The last thing I remember, he was still driving a cab. Then he owned a bar, which I idealized as a delicatessen in one of my pieces of work. But he was a hard worker.
Really?
Yeah.
And your mother?
Well, she worked. I was a very young boy, and it was still Depression time. And God, if both parents didn't work, we just couldn't have made it. And even then, we didn't make it. So I recall one time my mother coming home with a bandaged hand. She was a food waitress in a restaurant in Chicago. And she reached into the potatoes and a rat bit her. Just horrified. It just horrified me. But, she worked hard. Both parents worked hard.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
My brother's name was Ronnie. He was 5 years younger than I, and he just recently died.
Oh, really?
Just recently passed on.
Did you, of course, you went to school. Were you a good student?
I was a pretty good student, yes. I liked learning, and in those days, when I grew up, you had to learn lots of things, like how to write. You learned the Palmer method, how to write in the cursive. You didn't have a mixture of uppercase and lowercase printing, which made you look really like an illiterate if you were that way then. Today, kids, my grandson doesn't know how to write. I guess maybe somebody has decided he doesn't need it. There's a lot of things that today's children, it's been decided somehow that they don't need certain things, like how to write or how to speak. The kids today don't seem to want to converse, and it's not because they don't have a desire to converse. It's because so much is done to discourage communication, direct communication. Games are played, that's all. You play games, you don't talk to each other. You play games, which sort of divorce you from society. You're really not playing games with each other all the time. You're playing games against yourself. It was a little different when I went to school.
Very different. So I take it you like to write a lot. That was
Well, I do.
yeah, I know, but when you were a child, did you start writing?
I loved to write when I was a kid. I'd write stories, I'd make up stories, and I used to like to write poetry, and your tapping of your foot is making me nervous. I used to like to write poetry, like to write essays, stories, and when I got into high school English was just wonderful for me. I really, really had a great time with it. I loved the idea of reading, and I loved the idea of communicating with writing.
Who are some of the people you used to like to read? You were
I beg your
younger?
pardon?
Who were some of the authors that you would read when you were younger that you
Oh,
remember that
goodness,
may
come
have
on,
influenced you?
No, you're asking me a question I could never possibly come
Okay,
up with
okay.
a list of authors I enjoyed. Peculiarly, I was one of the kids who enjoyed Shakespeare, but I didn't see him I didn't see it as literature. I saw it as a dramatic possibilities, even as a boy in high school. I saw it as show business. And so I had a good time with that, and I was able to make out what was being said. I was able to find a variorum to help me understand some of the more difficult and more obscure language. I liked all of the novelists of the period I would read, but I mean, for me to now come up with a list of
I understand.
authors I enjoyed.
I'm not saying a list, just somebody you might.
Well,
That's okay. That's okay. You don't have to answer it. Did you start acting in high school?
yes, I liked to be in the plays in high school.
Do you remember what the first one was that you were in? What's the first one you remember?
It was a play written by a teacher.
Oh yeah.
I was never in in high school, I never did a play that was written by a playwright. In high school, we had, if I did a play by a playwright, I didn't know I was doing it. We had, our plays were things that we put together ourselves. I wrote a few of the plays. It wasn't then that I was doing anything that I thought was significant. I was a kid, a little boy. So I don't remember a list, but now if I'm going to have to come up with a lot of that information, like what did you read when you were a kid, I wish I'd had a little preparation. So
Oh,
I could have
okay, well, I
remembered that.
just-
It's not something I can come up
I understand. I'm not asking for technical lists. I just.
Well,
Did-
I just didn't come here. I mean, I'm not sitting here loaded with this, with backstory of material that something I did
All right.
more than 50, 60 years ago.
All right.
I just, I didn't come here prepared for that.
All right. You went through, I'm assuming you went through high school?
Yes, I graduated high school, and there was a war. And I enlisted in the Navy, and I would emerge later fantastically unheroic. I got a medical discharge after I'd been in enough to learn how to be a hospital medic and to work in a hospital as a medic. I was in the Navy, and I got a medical discharge because I have a feeling that they really were interested in winning that war.
Did they send you anywhere specific?
No, I was down at Norfolk Naval Hospital, Portsmouth, Virginia.
I
That's
see.
about it. That's it. And I worked at SOQ, Sick Officers Quarters, for a while. And they were bringing guys in who had some burn cases, who'd been seriously injured. And I was waiting to go on a ship and get off and do my duty when I caught pneumonia and got very, very sick.
All right, so we're assuming you went to the hospital and you got better then, and then,
Well, I wound up with asthmatic spasms, and they decided, now let's send the boy home.
Mm-hmm.
I went home, and I got on the GI Bill and went to school.
all right, the college in Chicago there?
Yes, I went to school at the Goodman Theater in Chicago, behind the Art Institute. It was the part of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I took a formal education in the theater, which is where I went, where I met my wife, Sarah. And I learned how to speak, how to put my voice there. I learned.
Do you think you spoke differently after you went to college than you did before? It really had
Oh,
a big
considerably.
Really?
Considerably. My first language was Yiddish.
Oh, really?
I was speaking English, of course, around that time, but I had no idea of the effect it had on my speech. And, it was,
That's almost a lost language now.
yes, it
Yiddish.
is, yeah.
I have some old Yiddish '78 I have jukeboxes, and I managed to. I was just talking about right now. And I listened to them, and I wish I knew what they were saying, because it's like I say,
Well,
almost a lost language.
I still, of course, I haven't spoken it regularly, so I've forgotten a lot, but I speak that language. I love the language. But I had to change my speech
Oh, really?
considerably, and of course, as a young boy, I learned where to put my voice, placement, and how to use my voice, how to use the speech. Actors, a lot of actors today can't really speak well. And of course they didn't have to unless they intended to go into the theater. But it seems to me an actor really should know how to speak clearly. I don't know if you've ever had to sit through some of the fast speech on West Wing and wonder if you're very stupid or if you've lost your total sense of hearing or understanding of English speech. But boy, it's sure sometimes very difficult.
Did you ever want to go into broadcasting? It seems like that.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I considered everything. But mostly, well, I was a fun kid at parties, but I didn't want to be a comedian, certainly. I mostly wanted to go into serious theater, and that's what I studied.
So, what point did you say I'm going to get up and do this stand-up comedy thing? I mean, you know, it was kind of a transition from like when vaudeville and actual stand-up comedy, where people stood up and they were themselves and talked about themselves.
Well, vaudeville wasn't about when I
Right, I understand.
when I was young. I never decided that. What happened was I went to New York and I was struggling in New York and got a job now and then, and I knew my business. I got a stock job. I did some stock plays. Then I was doing Shakespeare, and then I was doing all of the contemporary American playwrights. I was doing everybody. Whatever, we would do a show a week at Woodstock Opera House in Chicago. We were the Woodstock Players. That was Geraldine Page was part of that, and Tom Bosley was part of our group. Betsy Palmer was part of our group. Trying to think of, I left it, and then about a year, the following year after I left it, a kid named Paul Newman got in that group, but we were doing winter stock. We weren't doing summer stock. We were doing all sorts of things. Well, I went to New York finally to make my fortune. I got married. Sarah and I went to New York, and I got a call from Chicago, a fellow I knew, a friend of mine, fellow actor by the name of Martin Landau. He was called to go to Chicago to join this improvisational group called Compass Players. And he couldn't do it, and he suggested that he had a friend who was pretty good at this sort of thing, and maybe he'd go, and my name, of course, popped in. Meanwhile, they called me, but I had gotten started as a freelance writer. I was writing some sketches for Steve Allen's Tonight Show, and because I knew I was funny, but I didn't want to be a comedian. And I thought, gee, I've got this career finally. I'm earning a few bucks here and there by writing comedy. And, well, this thing was so inviting. Go to Chicago, where I came from. Here I was in New York, go to Chicago and join this group called Compass Players. We did improvisational theater. And I picked that up pretty quickly, and I was good at it. And I realized this is something I ought to be doing. In this group, I was working with a blonde kid named Mike Nichols and a dark-haired girl named Elaine May, a fellow named Severin Darden. Paul Sills was a director. And someday this group would be called Second City. But there I was in this group. Ultimately, I had developed a few improvisations on my own, solo improvisations, phone calls. God knows how I managed to do it. The audience would call out a suggestion during every show, and I'd go backstage, look for a partner. If I could work with Mike, I would work with Mike. If I could work with Elaine, I'd work with Elaine. Because I loved to work with them. I just adored them. And but when I couldn't work with them, I would come up with a phone call, just improvise it on stage. Some of those things were good, and you'd keep it. I would keep it and improve upon it. And I saw a kid named Mort Saul working at a nightclub. I never dreamed of doing nightclub, but here was this guy, and he wasn't telling jokes. It was a whole new thing. He had a newspaper under his arm, a little sweater. It was brilliantly funny. It was highly contemporary. And I was doing my own thing, but it was about living. It was about the problems we encounter just plain living. And I realized, you don't have to tell jokes, because I wasn't good at telling, well, jokes at that time. My mother-in-law is so fat, my girlfriend is so fat, so ugly. I would imitate the impressions of a gay guy. A big thing was to do a ferry, so-called ferry. I wasn't doing that stuff. I couldn't do that stuff. But I sure could do those little phone calls, and I would make people laugh. And I wangled it, because I saw him working without jokes. I figured, hey, I'll try. So I wangled an audition at that club. They let me get up on a stage. Now, I'd always worked sitting on a chair, because I figured when you make a phone call, you sit on a chair. You sit down somehow, you sit. And I would just, dial a phone. But I got into this nightclub to audition. It was low. And if I sat down on a chair, nobody would see me in the back. So I asked if I could borrow a bar stool. They didn't want to give me one. And this one guy who owned the place said, you sit down when you're working, you're going to lose authority. So I just don't know how to do this otherwise. I didn't even know how to say good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't say thank you. I didn't know what to do. Then finally, they got somebody up from a bar. The place was full, and they asked a guy if he'd stand up, so they brought the bar stool on the stage. And I sat down, they introduced me. I went up on stage. I didn't say a word to the audience. I didn't know how to talk to the audience. I just dialed the phone and did a thing. They laughed. And then I did another thing, and they laughed. I was on for about 15 minutes, and these people really liked me. I got off that stage, and I had a job. They hired me to come in that summer, a few months later, and for 4 weeks with 4-week option.
How much did they pay you?
$350 a week. Sounded like $1 million.
But it did.
It was $1 million.
How many shows did you do in a week?
2 shows a night,
Mm-hmm.
and 3 on Saturday. And I knew I had to have more material than that. I'd never written a piece, because these are all improvised. So I went home and sat there and talked to myself a few hours, and went back to New York to be with my wife, who was still in New York. And I developed 2 more hunks so that I could do at least 20 minutes on a stage, and I could do a different show for each set, just 2 different shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to work.
What other places did you go to?
Well, went from there. There was a little place in Los Angeles called the Avant-Garde, and that was my second job as a comedian. Now, I wasn't calling myself a comedian. I was being called a comedian. I wanted a different name. I wanted to be called a monologist. I thought that was fancy, and I really didn't think of myself as a comedian. Satirist, anything, but not a comedian. And for God's sakes, if you called me a comedian, maybe I could live with you. But if you called me a comic, I couldn't stand it.
Yeah,
See?
that's the way.
And or today, doesn't hardly matters. But as I worked, I developed more material. I got a job. My third job was in Las Vegas. And I can't remember. I was opening for a singer.
What hotel was it?
Huh?
Do you remember the hotel?
Oh, boy. I think it was Flamingo. Can't remember. Tropicana or Flamingo.
All right.
Just, I don't remember. I was opening for a singer. Oh, I know his name, but I can't remember it right now. And I was there for 4 weeks. And I never got a laugh.
Really?
Never. Oh, God, it was awful for me.
What do you think the difference was?
Oh, the difference was I didn't know how to approach an audience. The difference was quite simple. I thought, you can't just get up there and not say hello.
Oh, you were ignoring the audience, kind of?
You don't even, I'm not ignoring
Just
the
getting
audience.
up and kind of just doing your thing.
I get up, I do my thing, that fourth wall.
Uh-huh.
I was able to do that in a little on-team, clever little comedy room, At that time, these were jazz rooms that were now using performers who did humor, but it was more precious than it was funny. I didn't know how to get to them. I didn't know what to do with an audience. As a comedian, I got some laughs, but it was sort of medium. It was not very good. But I thought, gee, this is, at least it's a career. I'm working temporarily.
What did they say to you when you were working? Did even the guys come down and say?
Well, nobody ever bothered me.
Yeah.
They just made sure that said, give me the information I got, give me your best 10 minutes and get off. That's exactly what they said to me. Give me your best 10 minutes and get off. I said, I don't have best 10 minutes. I would do about 15 minutes. They were happy to see me go. And, but I learned. Little by little, I learned. I remember a fine man by the name of Billy Eckstein, and I was opening the show for him in Montreal, and I don't remember the name of the club. But I do know that Billy said to me every day, he would say, Shelley, do me a favor, just do it for me. Go out there tonight when they introduce you and say thank you to the people who have applauded to welcome you. Thank you, good evening. Just say that. Try it. So I can't do that, Billy. I'm different. I know you're different. We know you're different. But they don't know you're different. See, why don't you just be smart? Go out there. Just try it. See what happens. So one night, just to please him, I went out. I tried it. Said, thank you. Good evening. And not only that, I told him a little bit about my day, just a little bit. Then I sat down on the stool and did my first phone call. It was night and day. It was the difference between black and white. It was incredible. So from then on, I would just get on that stage and let the audience know that I really wanted to work for them. Somehow, they knew that I cared. That they hadn't come to see this prim and proper, snobby little punk getting out there trying to make them laugh. it became easier. Still, I was demanding of the audiences. Still, I had my moments when I thought the audiences should come to me. It occurred to me slowly, very slowly, that the audience had already come to you by being there. That the audience had no more obligation now. Now it was up to you. They'd already, if it's a love affair, they've already kissed you. What about you kissing them? But it was slow in coming. I was slow. And as I got more important as a performer, my arrogance grew in my expectations of them. But with that, thank God, learning how to soften it, how to be gentle, and how to love them. Soon, I wasn't walking off a stage talking to myself saying it was the audience's fault. Soon enough, thank God, I learned that it was never their fault. And it's not a matter of fault, even if it's yours. It's only a matter of this time and next time. It's only a matter of that. Just go out and do what you do. Your stuff is good, but that isn't the whole thing. You're not merely the vehicle through which your material passes, because that isn't a comedian. Comedian is more than his material. And pretty soon, I knew it.
At what point did you get national notoriety? When did it
What happened
snap?
was, and I was doing okay now. The people liked me. They would come and see me. But I still wasn't anybody. And Mortzall said to me, I made a record of my stuff. Why don't you go to this company? You can make a recording for your stuff. Because your stuff is good. He liked my stuff, and he was always very encouraging. And I would go to see him anytime I could, because I liked very much to watch him. And sure, I'd get my name on the album. My picture would be on an album. It might be in a window. How could it hurt me? But I said, once the audience hears my material, what's going to happen to me? He says, don't worry about that. You'll get new material. Besides that, they'll love your stuff. So I let Verve record me at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. So we would work this route: Chicago, San Francisco, the Blue Angel in New York. Some people worked the Village Vanguard. Some people worked at the Blue Angel. I was never, it didn't work in the Village Vanguard. But go there and do your well. They had recorded me, and pretty soon there was this record. There was a picture of me on the record. Oh, gee, it's nice. I look pretty good. Me sitting there with a cigarette. I always smoked. I smoked. And now somebody said, your record is hitting the charts. It's wonderful. And the record was going very, very well. And people were piling in to see me now. And I see, there's kids in San Francisco that I really liked, the Kingston Trio. They were working at the Purple Onion. I was working at the Hungry Eye. And they had a record out, and I had a record out, and the two of us are the top of the charts. They're first, and I'm second for months now. And I kept trying to be first, but they were beating me. But I didn't realize, hey, when you're there, it doesn't matter, because I was really doing very well. I made a lot of money, and I bought 2 suits at a time. And now I was moving from into certain rooms that I never thought I'd be. And I was beginning to realize we had something wonderful was happening to me.
And you were having to do more time when you were doing these headline rooms too, weren't you?
Oh, of course, yes.
How
Then
much-
I was the star.
How long did you do?
I guess 45 minutes, an hour.
No.
It all depends on if they had to turn the audience over.
Right.
But I would do.
It was like the comedy clubs today, pretty
There
much.
were no comedy clubs.
Right, but I mean the format, kind of.
The comedy clubs today are different. At that time, you had a singer and a
Oh.
performer, but
Right.
you didn't have a lot of comedians. You didn't have more than one comedian. There was a comedian. He was either a star or he was an opener for a singer. It was generally like that.
Right.
And
So,
if we had to turn the house over, you did a shorter show.
what was your first television appearance? Where people could not only
Well,
hear you,
during that
but they
time,
could see you.
During that time, I was being booked by Steve Allen, Ed Sullivan, Jack Parr. I was on there all the time. So, because I'd gotten hot, when you get hot, some things happen, and your agents had sending you out, and I was doing concert tours, and it all was coming up at about the same time. The recordings, new recordings, the development of new material, the doing of the television shows. Boy, that was a lot. And of course, you had a lot of variety, lots of variety shows.
Did you find that?
Perry Como, Dinah Shore, Andy Williams. You had so many variety shows, and you would do them. I would do them.
Did you find it eat up a lot of your material?
Oh, yes. Yes. But sometimes they wanted a repeat of your material. They wanted you to do that one again, see. So I was able to use certain pieces 2 and 3 times, even in a year. It didn't matter. But it was eating up material, my God, yes. And I couldn't find writers for me because it was so specific, the kind of work I was doing, and I couldn't find anybody who really could come up with anything. So I did write all my own stuff. And most of my stuff was improvised in the first place. I didn't put it down on paper right away. When I had to have my stuff transcribed for registering it with BMI, they said, give me your scripts. I have to hire a secretary to write my material, write down what I did, just listen to what I do, and it's on a record, and transcribe it, that's all. I wasn't really writing material on paper, but I had maybe 2 or 3 acts all told that I had written.
So how long did you do the roads and the concerts? How long did that go on for? Of course, I know you're still performing, but I mean...
There were some years, I guess, I don't know, about 10 years, I guess.
Yeah. You ever worked the Catskills?
No, I was not a Catskill
Oh,
performer.
no, you never... Yeah.
No, I got after I got started and I was well known. I went to Grosinger's for 1 weekend. But prior to that, as an actor, there was a group of actors called Stanley Wolf Players. We would do a play, and we would travel through the Catskills, but as actors. I did Stalag 17. I remember that. There was one show I did. I think there were 2 shows, and I can't remember the other one. But that's where I met Martin Landau.
What about Miami? Did you work any of the Miami?
No, I worked a couple of hotels in Miami. There was, but yeah, I can't. Yeah, I worked in Hollywood. Can't remember the name of the hotels, but
Right.
I worked a couple of hotels on it. Diplomat Hotel in Daytona, in Hollywood, Florida. In Miami, there was one other hotel.
Of course, at this time, too, you got television opportunities to do acting on television and films.
Well, get into. There was not enough television acting. I wanted more. But whenever there was an acting job, I grabbed it. Stage acting, whenever it was there, I grabbed it. Because that's really what I wanted to do. And I kept bothering my agents about it. I was really a pest about it. That's what I wanted to do. But it wasn't where the big money was, so I wasn't getting those jobs.
Were you ever approached for like your own sitcom or?
Yes, but at that time, when I was approached, I felt it was too early in my career. And at that time, I didn't want to give up my name for the character name. So
Did they have specific ideas about a sitcom? Did they approach you with some?
I was approached,
Yeah.
and there were some ideas, and but I didn't move quickly enough. But at that time, I wouldn't have done it. At that time, the shows I was looking at were not the kind of shows I wanted to do. Later on in life, when I wanted to do it, I wasn't as hot as I used to be. So.
Did you ever, I'm sure I know you did, but any stories about Ed Sullivan shows?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any stories about any of the Ed Sullivan shows you do? Everybody seems to always have like an Ed Sullivan.
Oh, sure,
Story.
I've got an Ed Sullivan story. There was a routine that what you did when you did an Ed Sullivan show was you would do the Sunday afternoon taping, which was essentially a dress rehearsal, but it was taped. And comedians always had a maximum amount of time. You did 7 minutes at the outside. If you were a star, 7 minutes. That's it. And most of my phone calls were timed just to work in that particular frame. But I had put together a piece called The Father and Son, which is me playing my father, talking to me at the other end of the phone, asking for $100 to go to acting school in New York. And I did that for that Sunday afternoon, and I knew it was long. And it ran 12 minutes. Now, when you did a show, you always, after that Sunday show was over, you waited in your dressing room to find out if everything was going to be all right. You waited for that call, and you hoped it would never come because he was a scary man. Well, he did call. I went to his room, which was a floor in that theater, and just the way he always was. Very good, very good. Nice, nice. I'm waiting for that other shoe to fall, because he's going to absolutely emasculate the piece of material. I know it. It's way too long. Says, Shelley, you know what I'd seen, that part where you tell your son to write a letter? Yes. So why don't you tell him to write the letter to his mother? So I said, if I say write the letter to your mother, I can't just say it that way. It's going to result in another line or two to qualify it, and then I have to make it pay off. He said, yeah, I know. She'd do that. This piece will be longer. Yeah, I know. Okay, I walked out of that room, thunderstruck. Imagine this man is asking me to lengthen a piece that is already too long. So I added that segment, which involved certainly about a minute added to the material. And then when I got on stage, I did it. Now generally, you're in full light, everything's working, You do the thing, you get off stage, and that's it. You don't, nothing's changed. Now, as I'm doing this piece, as I get to a point in this piece where it becomes poignant, it's funny, 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 then you realize this father's love for this boy is great. You begin to see the sentimentality here. And it's justified sentiment. Well, as I'm turning this, I'm aware that the lights are fading. All of the lights are fading except the spotlight. That is happening. And the spotlight, I feel, is irising in toward my face. I'm getting what I know as infinity lighting. And then as I get to another place, almost toward the end, violin music. Soft, coming in. Until the very end, and then the music just picks up. There's no such thing as a standing ovation in a television studio. No such thing. I mean, in a theater. I got it. There is no such thing as that kind of prolonged applause. I got that. I went to him, he shook hands with me, and told me how wonderful it was, and I went off stage, and they handed me a phone. It was Sylvia, his wife, waiting to talk to me, to tell me it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. I didn't have to go upstairs to my dressing room. I levitated.
Have you got that? Is that piece on film?
Huh?
Is that piece on film anywhere?
I don't have a copy of that. I'm not
But
sure.
it's around somewhere?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's somewhere.
That would be nice to find a copy. So was that maybe one of the most exhilarating performances you ever had?
Certainly on television.
Yeah?
Was the most wonderful, thrilling performance that I ever recall having on television. I was always terrified on television, always. You get on there, you pick up the phone, and almost always I did phone calls.
No.
You get on, you start, you finish, and you go off, and you really you get in the ambulance and go home. Just goes. That was a wreck.
Could you tell me about the incident with the, what was it, a documentary? Where somebody was following you and the telephone ringing and, you know what incident I'm talking about?
I know.
I know you've been probably asked about this
I know what you're talking
hundreds of times, but
Yes.
I want to hear your
It's
story
just
about
enough. It's just enough to perpetuate it.
it. Yeah, right.
It's a very long story, very difficult story.
I got lots of tape.
I was doing that routine. Anyway, I was at the Diplomat Hotel in Florida, and on opening night, everything went great. Everything went well. On the second night or the third night that I was there, during my show, a phone rang backstage at a certain point, and I went on, did my show, came off, and I had a road manager I was testing. I was teaching him to be a road manager, and he was new in the business. And I pointed out to him, Marty, see this bank of phones here on the wall? They shouldn't be hung up. They shouldn't be on the hook, because the event somebody calls, it'll happen again, because this is a very bad business. It could hurt the show. It could really hurt the show, because I do phone calls, and it could. So don't let that happen. On the next night, or the next two nights, whatever it was, And incidentally, I had been on film for 2 months. They'd been following, NBC was following me about. NBC DuPont show of the month or DuPont show of the week.
Was it a documentary kind of a thing?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it was a document. So I'm so used to that thing. I mean, I had this camera in my face, and the sound hung on me for weeks now. And it was like I wasn't there anymore.
It's like reality television now.
So this phone rang, and I took care of the problem. I joked about it on stage, and then I went backstage and I talked to Marty. I said, you know, it was not a problem. Then a few nights later, during this transition, where I was doing the father and son piece that I just told you about, where the transition happens, a phone rang very loudly. And I finished the routine. And I went backstage and I raised holy hell. I raised holy hell with Marty. I didn't blame him, but I said, for God's sakes, look what's happened here. We talked it over, you know, shouldn't have happened. I took the phone off the hook and I said, how hard is it to take this goddamn thing and just take it off the hook? That's what I did. I took it off the hook and I just threw it down. You could do it. Then I went up to my room and I really stormed. Follow me, follow me. That became the show of Comedian Backstage. It was supposed to be everything I did and what it's like, what it's the job. No. It became the whole thing. It became the whole show, the incident, and where I lost my temper backstage. Not the good things, not the fun of it, not the entertainment of it. It became Comedian Backstage. Frank McGee, who was the announcer, said, you're going to see something happen to him, to his performance sometime tonight. It was about that one night. They made it the opening night, which it wasn't. And instead of showing the first phone call first, they showed it last. So that nobody saw that there was a reason for me to lose my temper the second time. I looked at it, I turned around, said, how does it make me look? What's it going to do? Nobody saw a big problem with it, because I saw the rough cut and I didn't know what to do. Well, they showed it, 1963. My life became hell from that day on, from the day they showed it, because the American spirit of fair play. Anyway, I suffered a great deal because you just saw me going ape for no damn reason.
Well, it was certainly a misinterpretation of what happened.
Oh yes, I'm known as the guy who tore a phone off a wall.
But you
That's what was said.
today that would be great television.
But I didn't tear the phone off.
Yeah, right. I know, but it was misconstrued and exaggerated. But you know, nowadays that would be, like I said, you know, real television. Seems so trivial right now, you know, in this day and age. So, did not work a lot because of that?
Lots of things happened. People were canceling me. Lots of things happened. You couldn't really please anybody. Anything then that I did was misconstrued. You know, I couldn't insist on a certain light. I couldn't insist on that my mic was bad, because I would be being exactly what they expected me to be. what people expected me to be, and that was difficult. If a heckler came into the room and was destroying my work, I couldn't get anybody to help me in the room. I wasn't really the kind of comedian who wanted to do all that stuff with hecklers. I was used by many, many people so that they could say I did it to them. I'd get on a show and I could see it being set up on a talk show. I could feel myself being set up. And if I fall into the trap of saying the wrong thing, man, life became very, very difficult. After a while, you just sort of surrendered to it. You did what you could to have a career, or just to make a living. And I hadn't really killed anybody. I hadn't raped a child. I hadn't raped anybody. I had not done anything that a performer shouldn't have
You
done.
just wanted to put on a good show.
Yeah. And to this day, I pay dues for it.
Really?
Yes. Even a close friend will say, oh, I was there the night that you read the audience out. This was on another matter. I said, no, you weren't there when I read the audience. I didn't read the audience out. You're my friend. You were there. Don't you remember what happened? They had buried JFK that day. And I was on that stage that night. And at a certain point, I made a mistake. I said, I wish I weren't a comedian tonight. It was wrong for me to do that. It was a terrible mistake. But suddenly a woman started yelling at me, you failed us, you failed us. And the other people were yelling, let him alone, lady. And now the audience was all screaming at each other. And I tried to retract my mistake, but it was too late. And I hadn't read out the audience, but that's how he remembered it. People applied anything. I went back to Mr. Kelly's where I'd gotten started, where I worked all the time. I always went there. And as I'm coming in to work there, this was a few weeks after the event, and in Chicago, and I hear the maitre d' that knows me, that's worked with me, that knew me from my first crippling steps. And he's saying, now when Shelley Berman's on, and he's talking to the staff. I'd come in to rehearse that afternoon. He said, nobody moves. Nobody moves when he's on. I said, wait a minute, what are you saying? Well, we just want to make it easy for you, Shelley. I said, but look what you're doing. These are people who know me. You're making me look like a monster here. What? I never said that. Yeah, well, don't worry about it, Shelley. We're just trying to fix it up, make it easy for you. But I never was like this. You know that.
All right, you want to take a little break?